Hi, welcome to the Law of Fojo podcast. I am your host, Robert Fojo, and I have with me today Terese Grinnell. Terese is a nurse. She's one of my former clients. She has been a driving force protesting COVID vaccine mandates in New Hampshire, and she has been through somewhat of a harrowing experience, which we'll get into last fall, that in part prompted her to start a movement, I think is the best way to call it, called We the People. Therese, thank you for joining me. I really,
Mm.
really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate your time this morning and giving me a platform to kind of speak to individuals who may also just be in this position of what the heck is going on and how do we fix it.
Absolutely. So you're a nurse by trade, is that right?
I am currently a hospice nurse.
Mhm.
I've seen quite a bit in the last 2 years that was very worrisome to me. I'm also a foster mom and I have two boys that are in kindergarten and second grade. So kind of started my journey off just being concerned about how we were masking our children and how the boys were touching their faces and coming home sopping wet in their
Mm.
mask and not tolerating them, and just kind of this wasn't how um, we are taught in nursing school to use PPE. And from the very beginning, it just I had a lot of questions as to why we were doing things the way we were doing them.
Let me ask you about that. So what w how many years have you spent in the healthcare field?
Gosh, it's been 12 years now since I graduated. I was actually in finance doing project management for
Mhm.
Washington Mutual for about 20 years in corporate America. And when 9/11 happened and the financial market crashed, I decided, what do I really want to be when I grow up? I was kind of burnt out doing project management in the financial world. And they were shutting down offices here and moving them overseas and down to Texas. And I didn't want to leave New Hampshire. So that was a opportunity for me to go back to school. And I've always loved science. I absolutely love humans. I love people. And nursing, my mom was a nurse, my best friend's a nurse, my brother's a paramedic. And so I decided to investigate what it would take for me to become a registered nurse and pursued that at the age of 32.
Awesome.
Mhm.
What are these masks that we saw on people's faces for over 2 years? What are those masks usually intended for?
Typically, we would don on PPE, which would be a mask, a gown, gloves, going into the patient's room, and we would don off, take everything off as we left the room. We would not, and it was really to, if you went into a patient's room where maybe they had MRSA or C. difficile or something of that nature, to kind of keep it from getting onto you, where you would then bring it to your next patient when you do your next assessment. Um, Along with the hand hygiene and everything else. So, that's how you're taught in nursing school 101. I mean, you actually have to go through testing on how to put it on in the right order and take it off in the right order.
Right.
So this idea of having the same PPE on through your whole shift, or having a child wear it all day long and touching it and taking it off, and it none of that right out of the gate aligned with how we're taught to use PPE.
Now you mentioned that it was a
Mm.
a mask and all of that protective equipment was designed to keep you from, if you get something on you as part of, an interaction with a patient or as part of any kind of
Mhm.
procedure, it was that personal protective equipment was designed to keep you from bringing that to another patient or into another environment. What specifically were you trying to prevent, being transferred to another patient or prevent, um, some other environment from being contaminated with? What specifically? Blood, sweat, what
Mm.
exactly?
So it could be airborne, it could be bacteria, viruses. So it could be keeping us from getting it and
Mhm.
then turning around and giving it to the next patient. It could be just keeping it from being on our, you know, scrubs and on our stethoscope, on our gear. Just being really aware of, if there's something that is highly contagious in that room, we're going to don on a lot more than what we would for standard precautions. And we're going to make sure we take that all off before we even exit the room, like as we're
Mm-hmm.
going out, and then we're going to wash our hands, everything else before we go on to the next transaction. In the OR setting, it's to keep from anything falling into the wound, into a port of entry where you would be introducing bacteria or cross contaminate into open port of entry. So it just had never been used one mask for 8 hours, one
Right.
mask through an entire shift.
Right. They were situational. They were intended for situational protection.
Mhm.
Is that what you're trying to say?
Yep, exactly.
Okay. And so we were masking everybody up. The government we had local governments implementing municipal mandates. Then you had the New Hampshire state government implement a statewide mask mandate. I think it was November of 2020. Then school districts got in on the game. Masking someone, especially a child, for 8 hours.
It
That's
just
it's not something that definitely jumped out at you.
I would sit there and watch people, even at Market Basket, like, reach into their wallet, touch their face, here, touch their face, here, touch their face. And I was just like, this is, if you're going to do it, let's teach people to do it right if we truly think that this is going to help us in any way. But, the type of masks that were being used, people throwing them in their purse, kids throwing them in their backpacks, not washing them for days, coming home sopping wet. I remember my 6-year-old coming home. It was so gross. It was just so disgusting. I'm like, warm, dark, moist,
Mm,
sugary, like at a port of entry. I even talked to Dr. Sherman, one of our senators, in testimony last week. And I'm like, if you had he's a gastroenterologist, if you had a fresh surgical patient and I was the nurse assigned to your patient and you came in and that dressing was sopping wet on your new surgical wound, you would have my head
mhm.
because that is a petri dish for infection to brew.
When
And
you
no
went Yeah.
surgeon wants infection in their wounds. So you have this warm, dark, moist, sugary petri dish to grow bacteria sitting on your child's face all day long. As a nurse, I was just like, I bought Sam's Club bulk disposables. Can you please have him change his mask at least every few hours? That kind of
Mhm.
thing. And we don't have the staff to facilitate that. Just buy him a black mask, is what I was told. Just buy him a darker color mask.
Who told you that?
One of the teachers.
Teachers.
I'm just like, you're kidding me right now, right? Like that doesn't that the dirt doesn't go away just because you can't see it. And my boys have both been through a journey. They both have had a rough start coming out of foster care, and they're developmentally delayed. And you know, my older one tries to do everything the right way. He is when someone corrects him, he gets really stressed and anxious and nervous,
Mhm.
and he started flapping. He started this nervous tick where he was to the point where I was really worried about his wrist. It was becoming very, very pronounced.
Mm.
And he was coming home with 5 mask reminders, 6 mask reminders today, 4 mask reminders today. And you could just see his temperament, just him kind of sink into not feeling good about himself
Right.
because he didn't and the mask reminder was because he was chewing on his mask. So it was this like nervous thing that he would chew on it. And I couldn't get a doctor to give him an exemption because, nobody wants to be in the community known for going against, go along, get along kind of thing. And so,
Right.
then came the remote learning. And at the time, I was actually working as a liaison for one of the rehab hospitals, moving people out of the ICU beds and reviewing to make sure they were clinically sound and stable enough to move to the rehab. So a lot of COVID patients, right? Really critical job at the height of the pandemic. And now I'm home with 2 little boys running around my head, trying to get them onto Zoom calls, trying to help them get their education. And, that like everything I did was time sensitive. Like, can we discharge this patient today? Can we move them forward? Asking for the right information. So then the result was, oh, well, you can put them in essential care um, facilities. Okay, so you're a nurse, so you can send your 2 boys to childcare that the state's going to provide. But you go there and it's one person who has no education background. You had 15 kids, all ages, all from different schools, all trying to get onto their laptops at the same time.
So
The
essentially
younger
about
one,
essentially like a daycare where kids could do their schoolwork and you had a babysitter
right.
overseeing this somehow.
So it was the Boys and Girls Club. It was actually the one right down here in Concord.
Mhm.
And, it just was a mess. And then all of a sudden, believe it or not, this is going to take a whole nother side story, but one of the individuals there was caught in a pedophile sting. And I mean, it just, the whole thing, I'm just like,
Jeez.
what is going on? My boys are not getting educated. They're being put in a place where they're being exposed if this truly is a virus with all these other children anyway, versus being at the elementary school where they should have been to begin with. And they're not being educated. And I'm trying to keep my job in the height of a pandemic and keep a roof over their head. Right? So this was like, so I ended up switching jobs to where I'm now on call overnight, 5 p.m. to 8 a.m. So totally had to change my whole
Mhm.
career in order to keep my boys intact and keep them safe through the last 2 years. So when people say, oh, it's not that big of a deal, we didn't really suffer that much. We couldn't go to the beach, we couldn't go to church. We had a ton of my coworkers lose their jobs because they were already COVID recovered. They weren't comfortable with taking uh, warp speed, man-made
Yeah.
injection into their bodies. We saw the right to try refused in the ICUs. We saw businesses shut down. We saw the impact to our children. And all of our constitutional rights just like went out the window. We had school board members managing $55 million budgets and making decisions that are parental choice decisions that weren't healthy, that didn't make any sense. Um, and then we're all told if you don't go lockstep with what the CDC says, you're losing your license as a nurse.
Right.
So, I mean, it just, I'm like, what the heck is going on? My whole brain was just,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I've been wrestling with this in my head over and over again over the last 2 years. I was in on it at the very beginning. The minute the shutdowns happened, I questioned
mm,
the decision making. I questioned the legal basis for it. And while everything opened up pretty quickly after that, thankfully we weren't subjected to the extended lockdowns in blue states, although Sununu was still significantly behind other red state governors like DeSantis, Abbott, and so on. But our children, though, were still subjected to these ridiculous restrictions from remote learning to forced masking. Like you, I had 3 kids at home. I was trying to help with remote learning, and my 10-year-old son would come to me with he asked for help with math, and I was pretty good at math growing up. I'm still pretty good with it. But the stuff that he was learning is not math. I did not recognize it. I felt like Mr. Incredible slamming the table saying, "Math is math. This isn't math." And our kids suffered so much, and I don't think we're going to be able to determine how extensive the damage has been for years to come as they develop. We're going to start recognizing deficiencies in development and other setbacks that they're likely going to experience. The
yeah,
masking
I mean,
alone, it was so misguided, and I you know, in that environment as a nurse, you obviously were taking all that stuff off, throwing it away, and when you entered a new environment, you'd put on new equipment, right?
yeah,
So I like the point you made about parental choice. We were confronted with school districts and school district officials who were making decisions regarding our children's well-being or their health, and they were placing themselves in between parent and child with respect to masks and sending them home if they had the sniffles, not allowing them back into school if they didn't produce a negative COVID test. How did you deal with all that?
it just, I tried to just get through each day.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people were in that boat. we're trying to hold it together for our kids, trying to understand what's going on. Um, out of the gate, I was like, "Oh my gosh, are we all gonna be dead in 60 days?" Like, what is I was right there with what is going on with this virus. But then as time marched on and the impacts and, just even sitting there and the expectation of a kindergartner to be on 4 Zoom calls and to be able to sit and absorb any sort of teaching that way, or that everything was being done through, computer-based learning and, like, even their writing skills, their ability to just practice writing their letters was out the window. It was all being done on a keyboard,
Mhm.
and I'm like, "Really?" I mean, we're paying $20,000 a child in property taxes, and we're just sitting them in front of a computer. Like,
It
I just the awareness of the quality of education that our children were even being given, um, having to find out the hard way that the one-to-one care and the IEP that my boys, qualified for should have stayed intact when we
mhm.
went remote, and how I had to fight for that. It just it became kind of overwhelming to me how much dysfunction was really happening all around us.
Yeah. At what point did you come to the realization that you mentioned that for the first 60 days out of the gate, well, you thought out of the gate, you thought we'd all be dead within 60 days, and I remember when the reports were coming out from China about the coronavirus in December of 2019, January 2020, then the first case hit in Washington State here in the States. I remember being somewhat apprehensive, but at what point did you realize that this virus was not as deadly, well, not as deadly with respect to the majority of the population as the media was making it out to be?
Well, I was kind of in my echo chamber, and you have to remember I was dealing with the patients in the
Sure.
ICU. So I was seeing people die,
Mhm.
and I definitely believe the virus was absolutely, catastrophic, and we've seen 5.7 million people die around the world,
Mhm.
and, that's equivalent to the Holocaust, right?
Right.
Um, I started to question, um, why aren't we giving known medications that are FDA approved, that are showing some evidence of antiviral properties? Why is this nurse practitioner showing me where she's being told she will be fired if she prescribes this medication, which
Like,
is
what
safer
kind of
than
which
plasma?
medications?
So I don't know if we're allowed to say them anymore, but the ivermectin and the
Same
hydrochloric.
here.
And I was just like, why? I mean, even if it's just a placebo effect, like right now, we
Right.
don't know what we're up against. Why not throw everything in the kitchen sink that's safe to help people? Like that was the biggest red flag right there for me. Um, and then when I saw some of the things that were happening in the nursing homes, I was another big red flag for me.
Well,
Like, why are we sending these people back to where people are, you know, to me, our infants and our elderly are the most fragile,
Mhm.
and the most compromised. So, and then I think it was in New York where the ships were empty. And I'm like, well, why aren't they putting people on the ships for care and,
Mhm.
isolating them until we know more? But I think the big thing for me was why did everyone all of a sudden rush to ivermectin as a horse paste? And people don't realize, no, it was first a tablet, and it was
Right.
made as a tablet for humans, and it has incredible antiviral properties.
Mhm.
It's natural, it's been around for years and years and years, and I think when I saw that first email from one of my friends who's a nurse practitioner that said she would be fired if she prescribed it, I was like, "Okay, we're in trouble." That is never No clinician has ever been told by administration that you can't try something off label that
Yeah.
has a rationale for using it, especially in these circumstances. And then, of course,
So this was coming, this directive not to prescribe medications like ivermectin, this was coming from the administration
mhm,
in these facilities?
yes. Yep.
Why do you
Right
think
under the
that
gate.
wh
That
why do you
was,
think that was?
in hindsight, I have my rationale. At the time, I just I couldn't understand it. I still have a hard time. How many lives could we have saved
Right.
had as soon as someone tested positive, we gave them $15 worth of medications?
Mhm.
I just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever
Yeah, it
why
seems
we
like
weren't
we
doing that.
yeah, it seems like we abandoned, or in the medical field, I mean, you're supposed to mine and I'm not a doctor, obviously, but from what I understand, having spoken to physicians who have treated COVID patients and who otherwise have an expertise, obviously, in that field, the most important thing for a physician is the patient in front of you and how
Mhm.
you treat that patient.
Right.
And for some reason, we abandoned that line of thinking. We abandoned the notion of early treatment to prevent hospitalization. We only began treating COVID patients once they were hospitalized, and by then, some of this stuff is too late. I feel like we abandoned these principles in favor of a one size fits all. We're going to vaccinate our way out of this.
Yeah, it um I have a friend who is at Dartmouth, and he's actually one of the medical directors on one of the satellites. And he sent me a YouTube from the administration, and at 302, it actually states that you are only to go by the hospital protocol. You are not to follow any request by the patient or their family for the treatment of COVID. And I was like, when you have a loved one that's in the ICU who's dying, and you're not even going to check like a vitamin D level,
Right.
which is proven to be, foundational to disease process. Like, why? Hydration. If we started feeding, and they've been there for 2 weeks, and there's no nutrition going in, and you wonder why these people aren't surviving.
Hmm.
There was things where I would call and advocate for our family and ask for the most recent labs, and we haven't done labs in 3 days. Okay, I've never ever heard of a patient being in a hospital setting where they don't get at least daily labs.
Right.
Like, no one's checking the white blood count. No one's checking to see if bacterial pneumonia has started up, whether or not they also could benefit from, you know, antibiotics. The things that I saw these last 2 years, I can't unsee, and I know what my truth is, and I know what I saw.
Mhm.
And it's horror. It just it.
What would happen to a healthcare practitioner who withheld life saving treatment from a patient?
We take an oath to do no harm.
Yeah.
We take an oath to do no harm, and there's a standard of care.
Mm.
And so I don't know how so many of these clinicians were able to go home and where they might be even now mentally
Mm.
with looking backwards in hindsight and the decisions that they made. Um, there's a lot of clinicians that are dealing with a lot of emotional trauma, I think, from the last 2 years, and being put in a space where they didn't know which way was right, and realizing that maybe they trusted things that weren't trustworthy. Um, there is a video that is the nurses of the Third Reich that I was shown in nursing school. And it was shown to me and to all of us to always question and to always be on guard of what might or could happen. And there's a very large group out on Facebook. Show me your stethoscope. It was from the beauty pageant queen that came out and said she was a nurse, and the people in the View said, "Oh, nurses don't wear stethoscopes." And all of a sudden, the whole nursing population blew up and created a Facebook page, and it's probably got like 80,000 people on that page. And I posted that video, and there was probably 4 or 5,000 comments on there of people saying, "This is what we just experienced. We just went
Mhm.
through this again." And if you haven't watched that video, it's really important to go watch it, because those nurses really were led to believe that it was okay to put those babies out on the balcony to freeze to death to make room for those that were um, fighting the war, or to kind of allow those that were mentally ill to
Mhm.
be um, basically, and that's kind of where it started, the eugenics. And, human nature, I don't know, just looking back at how many people just don't want to face any sort of conflict. I think that's the culture we're in.
Mm.
Everyone's so tired, everyone's so busy, everyone's so weary. They just want to get through the day, and they don't really want to put themselves into a space of any sort of conflict. So that go along to get along, this is what everyone's doing, this is what everyone is saying is the
Right.
kind thing to do, that people didn't question, or if they did question it in their head, they weren't in a space where they felt safe enough to
Mm.
come out and do it without retaliatory acts.
Yeah,
Um,
I've never seen or experienced the kind of vitriol, the kind of aggressive opposition that we've encountered by just questioning these practices. I have never been. I've been practicing law 17 years. I have never been personally named in a pleading by an opposing lawyer, questioning my integrity, questioning whether I was the one orchestrating and organizing all of the mass mandate lawsuits. I have never been insulted by a judge in an order, and that happened several times by several judges. I've just never experienced this kind of aggression before in response to just mere questions and appropriate, proper, and legal challenges to these decisions and these policies. I've never experienced anything like it.
yeah, it's amazing. The amount of people that, you're promoting something that's gonna I'm said, if you want to do the vaccine, I'm not against that.
Right.
You go do what's right for you. But, there are people, you take your Jehovah's Witnesses, they come in and they don't want blood product. Is that pregnant mother, and is she's hemorrhaging? Am I going to do everything to save her and her baby? Absolutely. Am I going to honor the fact that she is not comfortable with blood product? Absolutely.
Mm.
The heroin addict who chooses to shoot up every day lands on our doorstep and needs medical attention. Are we going to just not provide care? The smoker who's lung disease, or the diabetic who's still going to McDonald's. I mean, we still take care of people, but then all of a sudden there was true anger, hostility, and um, just this energy that was so angry.
Hmm.
If somebody came in and wanted to seek care and wasn't comfortable with having this warp speed, new to market, unknown medication put into their body.
Right.
I'm organic, I say. I don't take any medications except for my vitamin D and my vitamin C. And even that I'm not real compliant with.
Mm.
Since when you know, yes, it was scary. COVID was very, very scary for a lot of people. But since when does your fear constitute that it's okay to make me do something that scares me?
Right. Well, let's
We have
talk about
legitimate
yeah,
fear, you know?
yeah. So the vaccine, you were very outspoken against the vaccine, particularly against mandates by employers, especially in the healthcare industry.
Yeah.
When did that all begin? When did you put your foot down and say, this is crazy. What are we doing?"
So, when I was working as a liaison, I actually had you would review referrals, and I remember one day I was looking at a referral, and it was actually she had had a stroke. But what struck me is in the narrative from the provider was that her husband had had a stroke 3 days prior, and they were both 4 days out from the vaccine.
Mm.
And we're seeing such an uptick in this. And the case manager from the hospital was like, T, are you seeing this? Like, we're seeing it. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, I think we need to report this to the CDC. And I'm like, yeah, I really think we need to start tracking what we're seeing. You don't know if it's just happen chance, but
Mhm.
two, 50 to 60-year-olds in the same household that were working full time and fully, no medical history at all,
Mhm.
both now debilitating CVAs, was just like, worrisome. And then Danny Dixon is someone that I follow. She's a respiratory therapist, and she, went to get her vaccine for being a healthcare clinician, and debilitating neurological side effects to the point where she can't function. And her kind of awareness of this is what it did to my body, and there was no doubt that was the root of it.
Right.
And she's still suffering, but following her and just being like, oh my gosh, like I can't even imagine. She's driving in her Jeep with her dog in her early 30s, full life, and then all of a sudden, like completely debilitating. But I think what really got me to stand up the first time was David LaRue, who is here local. His wife was an LNA at Dartmouth Hitchcock, and she was pregnant and she was going to nursing school. And she was in her last semester of nursing school at Plymouth. And she was facing the mandates, not just with her work, but also as a nursing student and being able to finish up school. And he did a Facebook Live and he was like, when are we going to stand up? Like, we have put everything on the line to get her through nursing school. And I know how hard that is, especially as
Mhm.
a young couple. And she's, got an unborn child and she's got her exemptions were denied and she's not going to be able to finish nursing school and she's going to lose her job. And like, when is everyone going to stand up and say this is not okay? That, there should be exemptions that should be allowing people to keep their livelihoods. And he was doing a 30-day vigil out in Dartmouth and he was a young veteran kid and my heart just broke. I'm like, you know what? He's right. When are we all going to stand up and say this is not okay? Um,
Yeah,
and then
forcing someone to choose between their livelihood or getting the jab
yeah,
is at least one federal court concluded that is a major due process problem. And from a human interest perspective, forget the legalities of it.
yeah.
That is unprecedented.
And then I had, all over the place, like in the same week, I had a lab tech at Concord Hospital, a friend of mine. She's been there for 28 years. She is the one that holds the healthcare for her family. And um, her husband was going through chemotherapy and oncology, and she was being forced. She got her exemption denied,
Mhm.
and she was terrified to go forward. She'd seen side effects. She was not comfortable with it. And for them to lose their home, her job, his oncology chemotherapy. I mean, I had a fire chief. I just had all these people coming into my realm and my sphere of influence. And I was like, okay, I can't stand in Lebanon, but I'm now working nights. I can stand in Concord. And I went with my poster board outside of Concord Hospital. I'll never forget, it was 98-degree weather. I put it out there on my social media. I'm going to go stand if anyone wants to come stand with me. And here I am with my red hair. I've been a nurse in the community for 10 years. I worked at Concord Hospital. I worked at Dartmouth Hitchcock. I worked for Concord Regional VNA. Um, my red hair, I don't go unnoticed. And here I am out on the corner. And one of the first cars that goes by had the window down and yelled out, Terese, you're a nurse. You should be ashamed of yourself. And my poster board said, honk if you're against mandates. And um, I thought, oh dear Lord, why am I out here? I'll never work again. I'm gonna lose my job.
Right.
This is back to my employer. But I just felt like I know there's people out here and they're just afraid to stand up. And shortly after that, I just closed my eyes. I had my music going. I was like, okay, Lord, please show me. I'm truly supposed to be here. Like, I'm a single mom with 3 kids. I got to
Mhm.
support them, right? But I believe in this. And then there was a honk. And then there was another honk. And
Yeah.
then someone crossed the crosswalk and came and stood with me.
Yeah.
And we ended the day with probably about 15 people. I get emotional even about this. But what was most important was at the end of the day, there was like an embankment behind the patio where we were standing, and someone waved me over. This lady had climbed up the back, and she waved me over. She said, "You see up there? That's where the administration meets on Wednesdays to go over staffing and how they're going to roll the mandate out for Concord Hospital. It was already rolled out for Dartmouth." And they heard the honks, and they looked out the window and they saw you,
Mhm.
and they know that they can't afford to roll this out with the current staffing issues, and that there'll be impact to the patients if they
Yeah.
do. She said, "I came down here. If they see me, if they know I'm here, I'm in a lot of trouble, but I'm begging you, please do not let this be a once and done thing. Please keep coming back. It matters."
Yeah.
So I drove away and I'm like, okay, so much for standing for one day. When can I go? And
Like,
I
shit, I do this every day now.
right. So I'm like, okay, I'll go 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. I'll go for an hour and a half during the lunch hour. And then, that grew to, can you do it at shift change? And then we had clinicians stopping by. We had all kinds of, I mean, people, I think 4 weeks into it, it got out onto one of the Liberty calendars and there was like 170 people showed up.
Right.
And it just kept growing and growing. And finally, someone that stood with me said, T, you cannot do this on your Facebook page anymore. We're going to build you a website. And I'm like,
Mhm.
well, I don't want to be a group. I don't want, I didn't set out to do that. You know what I mean? But people wanted to stand. People were starting to feel as though things were not
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I can't tell you how often I came across that, especially in 2021 when the first school district mask mandate lawsuit was filed and then the second one, and I kept getting phone call after phone call after phone call. It was always somebody who felt that this was wrong, didn't quite know how to explain why it was wrong, and that's kind of the issue with a lot of this is people know it's wrong, they just don't know why, because they don't understand, where these government institutions get their authority and how that all works. But they were always so relieved when I told them that not only did I agree with them, but there are other people just like you who've been calling me. You have no idea how many people are out there who are just like you who don't agree with this stuff. And they said, really? And they said, well, that's such a relief. There's so many people out there that agree that this stuff is incredibly intrusive and overreaching, but they're just not, they're afraid to
Mm.
put their reputation on the line and to speak out, and they're unaware of how much more other support there is out there.
Yeah, and the reality is I was never into politics. I remember someone standing with me and, "Oh, that's a rhino." And I'm like, "What is a rhino?" Like, I didn't know. And they're like, "Oh, it's a Republican in name only." And I'm like, "Okay." But I was the
Like our
typical
governor.
Yeah, I was the typical busy mom who was trying to get the groceries done, run the laundry, get the backpacks, and maybe had 5 or 10 minutes to myself, in the shower at the end of the night, before I went to
Right.
bed. I was not sitting on the couch watching Oprah eating bonbons, but I would go to the polls and just vote, for the Republican governor, and the ones everything below that, I usually would
Mhm,
keep probably blank because I didn't know who they were, what it was about. I
mhm,
didn't know what an executive council was. And so people say, that's why we're in this mess. And I say, well, the reality is, I just didn't want sales tax or income tax. I did economics in college. I understand this idea of, my $20 going to Washington's never going to make it back here. If I give
right,
$20 and buy a jacket for the guy who needs it, that's money better spent. And so, my dad listened to Rush Limbaugh and, on my way to high school. So I just kind of had that kind of understanding of, big government just ends up being very corrupt.
right,
Um, and that was kind of the extent, and that's most of my neighbors. That's my sphere of influence, is I'm always thinking about my neighbor Angela, who's an accountant, or, my neighbor Becky, who's a dental hygienist, and they've got kids and they're just, they're busy. So the mass population just really doesn't know that we need to be babysitting these elected. So that was kind of where I was at. I just thought I was going to be standing on the corner, with like-minded people and solidarity to stand up against the mandate. And if there's enough of us, they will sign your exemptions and you will keep your job. And, let's just encourage each other through this season. And we had great successes at Concord Hospital. We had, I think, almost everyone ended up getting their exemptions because we had a messenger group where we were all together and standing firm and had really good arguments for the exemptions when they went to HR, and they were supporting each other, and it did matter. So I kind of thought that was the end of my journey. I was linked in to Rebuild New Hampshire, who does great emails, and
yeah,
there was this email that came out, a call to action that there was going to be legislation voted on about a digital registry. And I guess I could back up. There was also, when the OSHA mandates were being announced by the Biden Harris, there was going to be a press release at the state house with our Republicans. And I went to that, and they're like, "Oh, next election we'll vote it out, and this won't be a problem." And I just like went, I'm like, "We cannot wait till next
right,
election." Like, I'm watching people die right now, being refused the right to try. I'm watching people right now lose their jobs. Like, and I just went up and I was like, "What are you guys talking about? Like, you could do what DeSantis is doing. You could do what they're doing in Texas. You could pass legislation to say, no, not here in New Hampshire.
right.
We can't wait 2 years for this." And anyways, that became a big to do. So that I kind of got thrown into the spotlight with that and some news articles. And then there was the DHHS, the digital registry to track everyone, and it being automatically you're opted in and you have to go through all these hoops to
Yeah.
get your name removed.
Mhm.
And I went and I spoke at that and kind of got some attention there from
So let
just
me let, let me
one
go
month.
back. At there was a press briefing at the state house. You mentioned that. What were they addressing there that you showed up to?
So that was when the news broke that Biden was going to have every
Okay.
company that had over 100 employees was going
Right.
to
The
be
the
releasing
OSHA
them,
vaccine mandate.
the OSHA
Okay.
man. And so there was quite a few people there, and I just got up there. I was like, "You
Okay.
Republicans!"
That
Like,
was a protest.
it was just a press
It
release
was a
that they
press
were
release.
doing,
Okay.
um, but a lot of us who had a vested interest in the mandates
Mhm.
were there, and I sat and listened politely, and then when they were like, "Oh, rah, 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 we'll get better people elected to, fix it into,"
Yeah.
yeah, I went up and I shared my concern, and the crowd joined in with me, and I think our elected here in New Hampshire for the first time were like, "Who is this feisty redheaded nurse?" And that's not gonna let us just, pretend like politics, like, we don't really have to do anything or get in a game to help our
Yeah.
constituents.
Well, I think one of the big
Mm,
reasons why we found ourselves in this mess, and by mess I mean a governor who was renewing a state of emergency declaration 21 times. We were in an emergency status for 400 and some days. It was absurd. You had mayors and aldermen voting for mask mandates in cities. You had school districts passing mask mandates for kids.
mhm.
I think the big reason why we found ourselves in that kind of environment is we stopped paying attention at the local level. Like you said, we pay attention once every election cycle, every 4 years. We get into who's going to be the next president, and that obviously occupies our attention for a significant period of time. And then once that's over, we go back to our daily lives and we forget about what's happening locally. And all the majority of this damage, the mask mandates, this lockdowns, all that happened at the state and local level. I loved watching parents running for school boards recently and trying to get more involved in once we realize what our kids are learning in school, how they're learning this stuff, and then obviously the restrictive measures that were taken, people are starting to wake up. And that's what I was always telling these parents. I would explain that, yeah, lawsuits a last resort kind of thing, but you need to wake up and start paying attention. We have become too complacent with all this, and we think that simply because there's a Republican in office, they serve us. No, not necessarily. Um,
Right. And I mean, we're about 40 minutes into our conversation. I want people to have hope. So if you've held on this long with us, there is a solution. Um, I think the reality is we are at war.
mhm.
Okay. Some people say it's a spiritual war, good and evil, whatever it is, but we are at war. And the condition of our troops is a reality. They're tired, they're weary, they're working 80 hours a week. They barely can, get through all the things that are on their to-do list in a day. And so if you look at the condition of our troops and you say, it's very hard for someone who's not working nights like I am to really understand and vet out our elected. And I gotta tell you, I've been down at the State House every week since January, and the people that are down there, there's some good, there's some fence riders, but a lot of that are down there are in this political arena because they're cut from a cloth where ego and power and narcissism exist. And how do we clean that out? How do we fix the fact that we have school board members who are responsible for $55 million budget, but have absolutely no background in finance, absolutely no background in business management, and there's no accountability and there's no oversight. And so I have come up with a solution called the resolve. And we may not get to that here in this conversation, but I want people to know that it's very simple. It's just a numbers game. And in the end, we are going to make it very easy for people to grab and go and get to the polls and know who to vote for, who is truly for the Constitution and freedom versus this global agenda, because they become very public now that they are for this global agenda and that they think the Constitution is outdated. And
We have time to talk about it. Why don't you
yep,
explain what "We the People" is and what "Resolve" is?
Sure. So wethepeoplenh.org is the website. We the People NH is on Facebook, and we have groups that drill down to We the People, Manchester, New Hampshire, that kind of thing. And we did that so we could start to unite and assemble, because that's what we need to do. We have to assemble. The game is over when we all link arms and stand up. And what they fear the most is us actually all coming together and standing up for our Constitution and standing up for what our forefathers fought for. So when you think about it, our forefathers got on a boat when they thought the world was flat to leave tyranny and find freedom.
Mm.
And I'm not in a position where I'm going to let that just slip through my fingers for the sake of my boys. I'm going to fight for that. So if we assemble, what they fear the most, they spend millions and millions and millions of dollars to buy our vote with name recognition, flyers, signs, ads. They do this whole political campaigning thing. The idea behind the resolve is if we have 100 participants in April, which we've already exceeded, we're in April now, and
Hmm.
each participant decides that they are actively participate is a verb, right? You got to do something. You go
Right.
find 10 people who are for the Constitution and are not okay with this global agenda, and you ask them to participate. If we did that for 4 months straight, we would have over 100,000 voters in the state of New Hampshire who are all going to vote for Constitution liberty-minded ballot.
Hmm.
That's one prong, is getting all the participants. The second prong is I've got a group of 30 Liberty leads who have been deeply rooted in politics here in New Hampshire, but I have come to find out that they are truly vetted for the Constitution, for liberty, and they are not for this global agenda. And they're helping me figure out who is the best lineup. Who should we be asking to be a senator? Who should we be asking to be on the executive council? Who should we be asking to be governor? All the way down from sheriffs to state reps. And we already have the technology built that you'll be able to put in your town just through a drop down menu, put in your town, and up will come a mock ballot with who we've discerned is the best of the best. And you
Hmm.
can just print it and go to the polls. You can share it with your phone and go and know that you're voting for someone that we have vetted out to be the most liberty minded. I am not running for an elected position. The only skin I have in the game is for my two boys.
Right.
And we kind of jumped over the whole thing that I went to an executive council meeting and
We'll
was
get
there
to
to
that.
stop $29 million that had a line item to isolate and quarantine those that weren't vaccinated. And Governor Sununu, who I've always voted for, did not like that we did a huge campaign to say, no, thank you. We have a surplus in the state. We don't need this money. And we're not going to look like Australia, where we're putting people into some sort of a camp, um, to where he had the state troopers tap me on the shoulder and put me into zip ties and put me in a paddy wagon for allegedly saying the word amen of all things. And there's absolutely zero discovery in what the
That
DA
that
had.
that was in October at the October executive council meeting,
Yes, correct.
and that's all you said. You said amen,
Allegedly. There's
allegedly.
absolutely no even evidence. I'm like, I don't even remember saying that. Like, I do say that when I'm in agreement with something.
Hmm.
And the only thing they have is one of the troopers saying that he recognized my voice from Facebook and they heard the word said and it came from my direction. But there's no actual evidence. There was 170 cell phones out that day. Not one piece of video footage we have says that I ever said the word. By any means, if I said it, it was never loud enough to disrupt the meeting. And with disorderly conduct, it should be, hey, you need to stop what you are doing
Hmm.
or leave. You need to stop what you're doing, or we're going to ticket you. It's not tap you on the shoulder, come behind a
Right.
curtain, put you in zip ties, and throw you in a paddy
Well,
wagon.
that's what you were charged with? Disorderly
Yeah.
conduct? The
Mhm.
disorderly conduct, one of the elements of the crime is that you attract the attention of other people, and you essentially disrupt other people. So if you're outside of a building at 3 a.m. and you're yelling and screaming and people look out their windows, you wake them up, that's disorderly conduct. Um, doesn't sound like that's what happened here.
Yeah, we have redress of grievances. It's a public meeting, and the New Hampshire Constitution says we have a right to be there to see how our legislators are legislating and let them know um, our thoughts and our opinions on that. Um, there's 5 parts to our First Amendment, and all 5 were actually violated that day. We had a 70-year-old who I think they really intended to get the person sitting in front of her, who is a Liberty lead. I think they picked her out of the crowd incorrectly, and excessive force was used on her before she resisted, and then she was thrown to the ground and given a concussion, all documented and videotaped. And we had a recently retired FBI agent on the back wall who's like, Governor Sununu incited violence that day. He tried to take me up with knowing that there was 300 people in that room who care deeply about me and the passion that I have for doing
Mm.
what's right for our children. And by having me arrested, he thought the entire room would blow up. Fortunately, I am not religious, I'm spiritual, but we had several of us had it put on our heart that we were going to sit very, very quiet in this meeting, that we weren't going to give them reason
Right.
to unlawfully arrest us. But I think
Were you
as
quiet? Were you quiet throughout the meeting up until you were arrested?
yeah, it was an hour and 18 minutes into the meeting
Hmm.
by the video discovery in that room when I was tapped on the shoulder. And there was like a blanket warning given after the Pledge of Allegiance. And then there was another one where I was actually taking my boys to the bathroom. Actually, my 6 and 7-year-old, and was in the bathroom. And when I came back from the bathroom, there's actually a picture where I'm reminding everyone, I'm like, shh, make sure you stay quiet, you know? And, you know, the whole idea that I did anything that warranted being put into that paddy
Right.
wagon and sitting in that wagon for 2 hours and then having to sit in a jail cell with a 70-year-old who's crying her eyes out and is bruised all over the place. Um, it just was horrible.
Hmm.
And it really was an intention to chill,
Yeah.
to stop me from participating in the political process. And the whole court hearing and how it's played itself out. We're 6 months out. There's absolutely zero discovery.
When you
We
say
actually have
zero discovery, the prosecution's supposed to turn over all the information they have to support the charge. When you say zero discovery, what do you mean?
well, the only thing I have is a trooper saying that they heard the word said over in my direction and it
Yeah.
sounded like my voice. The video footage that the state has does not show a loud noise, does not show anyone doing anything to warrant the initial arrest.
Okay.
And the bill of particulars was ordered by the judge, and nothing has been provided by the DA. So, but they're going to potentially still take us to full trial, which will be on the taxpayers, right?
Have
Which
you
is
had a trial
ridiculous.
date? I know that tomorrow is the trial management conference.
So tomorrow we'll
But
find out if they're going to go ahead and take all 9 of us to a full trial, or whether or not they're going to dismiss some of the charges. And rumor has it they're going to take it to full trial. They'll give us a trial date after the elections, and then they'll probably drop it right before the trial date. So it's all a game. It's all a political game to keep us, the people. This is not a government that is for the people, by the people.
mhm.
This is a governor that I voted for, that I thought was a righteous man, but he is all about taking in federal money that has global ties to this global agenda. His brother works for the World Economic Forum, which, if you go out to that website, he is a lead there. And you
Is he
type
really? I
in,
didn't know that.
yeah, John Sununu is a lead at the World Economic
Okay.
Forum. So you go to that site and you type in the Great Reset,
Mhm.
and it actually states we will use a health crisis. We will use a health crisis to reform global policy from the USA
Right.
to China. They're not even private about it.
No,
And
I've read some stuff about the World Economic Forum. I've the leader, um, he wrote a book called The Great Reset, right?
yep,
And they're very public about this. I am well aware of that. I was going to dedicate a whole podcast episode to the World Economic Forum and if it's something that we should be concerned about. But I didn't know that John Sununu was involved with
yeah,
WEF.
yeah, they definitely believe that because of global climate change, food, that they need to depopulate the world. And they're very, I'm not a Q person, I'm not a conspiracy person, I never
Yeah.
had time for any of that, but it's right there in black and white, guys. So,
Well, the way that side of the way the left normally thinks is you need a crisis. I mean, Rahm Emanuel was famous for saying this. Rahm Emanuel was part of the Obama administration. He was his chief of staff. He was quoted at one point at the beginning of that administration as saying, "You can't let a crisis go to waste,"
Yep.
because that is when people emotionally are very vulnerable, and the government can ram down their throats whatever policies they want under the guise of safety or some kind of security, but the policies that they're pushing are full of all sorts of bullshit that no one would ever otherwise vote for in a normal environment.
Right. So what we have coming from a corporate America background, in my opinion, is you have these globalists that are looking at this from a business perspective, and we are livestock to them. And when you look at the baby boomers all hitting the nursing homes and the cost of $15,000 a month to house someone who is on Medicare, who's over the age of 80, it makes sense that they would want to that's a big line item, right? And that person's no longer producing tax revenue. So I hate to sound like that, but that is the reality of how they're looking at this. They're zooming out. So what do we do? What do we do? That's me out at the barn going, okay, Lord, you say when we're in a pickle, there's always a way out. And I am not going to let this country and our constitution and everything slip through my fingers. And this is what I came up with, guys. It's called the resolve. And the resolve is simply all of us coming together to decide on a Liberty ballot in November that only elects people in that are salt of the earth, that are in this for a proven reason to preserve our Constitution. We have an old house with 100 layers of paint on it. When I go down to the state house, they pull out the RSA book. It is like this, it's like 6 inches thick. And they don't even know they've written so many laws. We need people in there that are going to start to peel it back
Yeah.
to the original intent, which is a limited government that is not government overreach, that does provide basic safety and security for us as constituents, but is not a bunch of conflict of interest. It's not a bunch of pharmaceutical money. It's not about, it's about getting our children educated. It's about doing what's right for the voter. And so we need people that are there that are for the people, by the people. I should not have to babysit every single one of our elected officials, and neither should anybody else. But I got to tell you, Roseanne, who's from Bedford, in her little red shirt, who's retired, she is down there every day. They see her coming and they're just like, oh shit. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that out. But she has stopped a corrupt individual from becoming a judge. She has held them accountable. When she's in a room and there's 20 lobbyists and there's only one person speaking for the constituents, she's standing up and she's being a bulldog for all of us. We
Yeah.
need more
I don't.
Roseannes down there.
Yeah. So resolve is about finding and tapping into that energy among people, and there's a lot of it out there. It's just they need the confidence to come forward.
Yep. And all you have to do is your name, your email, so that we have a unique identifier. So if we have any tiebreakers, we can pull you together and say, okay, we have A and B, pros and cons. Which one do we all want to put our vote to? It's going to be
Where
collab
would they
November.
go? Where would someone go to participate and help with the resolve effort?
Yep. And the last piece of information, just so you know, is the zip code. And why are we doing the
Okay.
zip code? Because if we know that we have a really bad apple on the seacoast, we want to be able to data mine who's participating to say, do we have enough participants in the seacoast area to truly get this guy out? And if not, then we have a campaign plan that we're going to go and we're going to get more participants in that part of the state so that we can truly get that person out come November. The best part of this is it will be a write-in ballot. So a lot of our voter integrity crew is really concerned about the machines, and rightfully so with the evidence we now have. If you write the name in and you write it in correctly, it has to be hand counted. And we'll
Mm.
also be having people be poll watchers to make sure that those votes are actually counted. And we will also have some exit polling data as a result of the resolve too. In addition to that, if I can show somebody we have 200,000 participants, you might get someone who's not in it. So we had Thad Riley come to me and say, I need $800,000 to make it to the primary to even have a chance to go up against Sununu. I had Julian say, I need $150,000 just to talk to Corey Lewandowski to see if I can get a Trump endorsement. And my mind is like, how is all this money part of the campaign process? And these people are out 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, running all over the state, destroying their health, destroying their families. We've got a lot of people that are good people that want to run, but they don't want to work within that framework. And I don't blame them. So the resolve is, hey, if you are someone who wants to run and do right by the people, you don't have to go through any of that process. We'll vet
Mm.
you out and we'll point all the votes to you as a write-in. And at the end of the day, you don't have to deal with the corrupt parties or anything else. So where do you go? It's www.wethepeoplenh.org. And if you look for the tab, there's a button on the homepage and there's a tab at the top called the Resolve. And you go there, it has some of the content we put into our brochure. We're still polishing this up. This idea is only 2 weeks old, so extend us some grace. But if you go down to the bottom, the functionality is there.
Mhm.
Put your name, your email, and your zip code. That goes to a secure server that's owned by the web designer who is a patriot right here in the Lakes region. We will not be using it for any other issue. I assure you, with my boys' future and our Constitution on the line, that your information will be used only for the purpose to get us to November and get the right people elected, the best pick of the litter for New Hampshire. And I'm begging anyone who's in a position to take on the responsibility of being an elected in our state, whether it be a sheriff, whether it be a state rep, whether it be executive council, a senator, anyone that's watching this that wants to get in the game and be part of the solution, please reach out to us, because we are actively working to get that inventory for the best possible lineup for the people here in New Hampshire. It is a David and a Goliath effort.
Mhm.
A lot of people say a write-in won't work. You won't get enough participants, Terese. But to me, it's just a numbers game. We've seen what happened in Canada with the convoys. People want to do something. They want to do something that's going to make a difference. And right now, I feel like this is our Hail Mary. This is our last chance to make our state better than Florida this time next year. We can do it. The game is over if we all link arms and say no more. And we say we're only going to have people there that really care about our freedom
Mhm.
and not a global agenda and money in their pocket.
I agree. I agree. I think that energy that's coalesced in that fashion, and if you have a line of people drawing a line in the sand saying, this is it, enough is enough, we need to change this, I think that that's what it will take. And I think you're doing a great job in organizing that effort. So, wethepeoplenh.org, that's where you would find information about the organization and the Resolve effort.
Yeah, it cannot be a solo act, guys. It's got to be a
Right.
symphony. It's going to take every single person who cares to get involved and get the word out.
Awesome.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay. Well, thank you, Terese. I really appreciate you coming on and joining me and talking with me about all this. Good luck tomorrow with the trial management conference. I hope that that case goes away quickly, as it should. I think that anyone that's been caught in the crosshairs or arrested, whether it's school board meetings or at events, executive council meetings like that, I think that I think the government needs to just kind of let that stuff go away, chalk it up to a misunderstanding, if you will. But I wish you the best with that, and we'll definitely stay in touch because we have a lot of good work to do.
Sounds good. Look
Thank
forward
you,
to it.
Therese.
Thank you for your time and all your hard work.
Thank you. Take care.